Answer, C. Bacteria and antibiotics explanation. This is an example of antagonistic coevolution, where bacteria evolve resistance to antibiotics, while the antibiotics continue to exert selective pressure for bacteria to become more resistant. 4. Conclusion. Coevolution emphasizes the dynamic, reciprocal relationship between interacting species and the way in which each species adapts to the pressures exerted by its counterpart. Whether it is a predator-prey relationship, parasite-host interaction, or mutualistic partnerships, coevolution plays a vital role in shaping ecological systems and driving the evolution of species. This reciprocal adaptation enhances our understanding of evolutionary processes in nature. Let me know when you're ready to continue with the next topic. Smile. You said, next. ChatGPT said, ChatGPT. Population Genetics 1. Detailed lecture. Population genetics is a branch of genetics that deals with the study of genetic variation within populations and the genetic structure of populations. It applies the principles of Mendelian inheritance, combined with evolutionary mechanisms, to understand how populations evolve over time due to various forces such as mutation, genetic drift, gene flow, and natural selection. The study of population genetics is essential for understanding the mechanisms of evolutionary change and the role of genetics in speciation, adaptation, and biodiversity. 2. Key concepts in population genetics. A. Genetic variation in populations. Genetic variation is the key to evolution. It refers to the differences in genetic makeup among individuals in a population. This variation can be at different levels: gene frequencies, alleles, and phenotypic traits. Genetic diversity is essential for a population to adapt to changing environments. 1. Sources of genetic variation. Mutations, the original source of genetic variation. Mutations alter the DNA sequence and introduce new alleles into the gene pool. Mutations can be beneficial, neutral, or harmful. Gene flow, movement of alleles between populations through migration, resulting in increased genetic diversity. For example, individuals moving between two populations of the same species can introduce new alleles. Sexual reproduction, the combination of genes through recombination during meiosis and fertilization promotes genetic diversity, generating unique genotypes. 2. Types of genetic variation. Allelic variation, differences in alleles for the same gene. For example, the gene responsible for coat color in a species may have multiple alleles contributing to different phenotypic forms. Genotypic variation, differences in the combinations of alleles genotypes present in an individual. Phenotypic variation, observable characteristics of an organism, like color, size, and shape, arising from genetic factors or environmental influences. B. Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. The Hardy-Weinberg principle is a fundamental concept in population genetics. It describes a condition under which genetic variation in a population will remain constant from one generation to the next unless specific evolutionary forces are acting on the population. Conditions for Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium: no mutation, no migration, gene flow, large population size, no genetic drift, random mating, no natural selection. If a population meets these conditions, allele frequencies will remain constant across generations, and the population is in genetic equilibrium. The Hardy-Weinberg equation allows the calculation of allele and genotype frequencies in a population. P2 plus 2PQ plus Q2 equals 1 P2 plus 2PQ plus Q2 equals 1 where P2 is the frequency of the homozygous dominant genotype. 2 PQ. 2PQ is the frequency of the heterozygous genotype. Q. 2Q2 is the frequency of the homozygous recessive genotype. P and Q. Q are the frequencies of the dominant and recessive alleles. C. Evolutionary forces affecting populations. There are several mechanisms that can lead to changes in allele frequencies in a population, driving evolutionary change. 1. Natural selection. Darwin's theory of natural selection explains how organisms with advantageous traits are more likely to survive and reproduce, passing these traits on to future generations. Directional selection favors one extreme phenotype, causing the allele frequency to shift in one direction. Disruptive selection favors extreme phenotypes at both ends of the spectrum, and may lead to increased genetic diversity and potentially speciation. Stabilizing selection favors the average phenotype and reduces genetic variation by selecting against extreme traits. 2. Genetic drift. Genetic drift refers to random changes in allele frequencies due to chance events. It has a stronger effect in small populations, where alleles can become fixed or lost purely by chance. Bottleneck effect, a drastic reduction in population size that leads to a loss of genetic diversity. Founder effect, when a small group of individuals forms a new population, their genetic makeup may not be representative of the original population, leading to genetic differences. 3. Gene flow. Gene flow occurs when individuals move between populations, introducing new alleles and altering allele frequencies in both populations. Immigration and emigration can significantly affect the genetic makeup of a population and influence its evolutionary path. 4. Mutation. Mutation is the original source of new genetic variation. Random mutations can introduce new alleles into the gene pool, providing raw material for natural selection to act upon. D. Inbreeding and outbreeding. Inbreeding occurs when individuals that are closely related mate with one another, often leading to the expression of deleterious recessive traits due to the increased homozygosity. Outbreeding increases genetic diversity by bringing together unrelated individuals, which may result in hybrid vigor or heterosis, improving the fitness of offspring. 3. Previous year's GATE questions on population genetics Q1, GATE Ecology and Evolution 2016. In a population, the allele frequencies of A and R, P and Q, respectively. If the frequency of heterozygotes in the population is represented as 2PQ, what is the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium? A. P equals 0.6, Q equals 0.4 B, P plus Q equals 1 C, 2PQ equals 1 D, none of the above. Answer, B. P plus Q equals 1 explanation. The Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium principle states that the sum of allele frequencies in a population should be equal to 1, P plus Q equals 1. P plus Q equals 1. Q2, GATE Ecology and Evolution 2018. What effect does gene flow between two populations of a species have on their genetic diversity? A. Increases genetic diversity within both populations. B. Decreases genetic diversity within both populations. C. Increases genetic diversity within one population and decreases in the other. D. Has no effect on genetic diversity. Answer, A. Increases genetic diversity within both populations. Explanation. Gene flow introduces new alleles from one population into another, which increases the genetic diversity within both populations. Q3 Gate Ecology and Evolution 2020. In a population of beetles, the allele frequency of a dominant allele A is 0.7 and the recessive allele A is 0.3. What is the frequency of heterozygotes in Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium? A 0.49b, 0.42c, 0.63d, 0.84. Answer, B 0.42. Explanation. Using the Hardy-Weinberg equation, 2 PQ equals 2, 0.7, 0.3 equals 0.42. 2 PQ equals 2, 0.7, 0.3 equals 0.42. 4. Conclusion. Population genetics is fundamental to understanding how genetic variation is maintained and altered within populations over time. It combines the principles of Mendelian genetics with the forces of evolution, such as mutation, genetic drift, gene flow, and natural selection, to explain the mechanisms behind the genetic diversity and evolution of populations. Population genetics is essential for studying not only the evolutionary process but also for applied fields like conservation genetics, disease genetics, and crop and livestock breeding. Ready to proceed to the next topic? Let me know. Smile. You said, next. ChatGPT said, ChatGPT Speciation 1. Detailed lecture. Speciation is the evolutionary process by which populations evolve to become distinct species. It is one of the fundamental concepts in evolutionary biology and explains how new species arise. Over time, the genetic differences between populations accumulate through various mechanisms, making the populations reproductively isolated from one another, ultimately leading to the formation of separate species. Speciation can occur through several processes, primarily involving mechanisms of reproductive isolation and genetic divergence. Understanding speciation is crucial to understanding biodiversity, as it is the engine behind the formation of the vast variety of life forms. 2. Types of speciation. A. Allopatric speciation. Allopatric speciation occurs when populations of a species become geographically isolated from one another, preventing gene flow between them. Over time, genetic differences accumulate due to natural selection, genetic drift, and mutation, leading to reproductive isolation. This is the most common mode of speciation. Example. The formation of different species of Darwin's finches on different islands in the Galapagos archipelago. The populations became geographically isolated, and due to different selective pressures on each island, the finches evolved distinct traits over time. B. Sympatric speciation. Sympatric speciation occurs when new species arise within the same geographic area. Despite no physical barrier separating the populations, genetic and behavioral differences accumulate, leading to reproductive isolation. This can happen through ecological, behavioral, or temporal isolation. Example. Apple maggot-flies. A population of maggot-flies initially lays eggs in hawthorn fruits, but some individuals start laying eggs in apple fruits, which ripen earlier. This temporal separation in breeding time can lead to reproductive isolation and speciation. C. Parapatric speciation. Parapatric speciation occurs when B. Sympatric speciation. Sympatric speciation occurs when new species arise within the same geographic area. Despite no physical barrier separating the populations, genetic and behavioral differences accumulate, leading to reproductive isolation. This can happen through ecological, behavioral, or temporal isolation. Example. Apple maggot-flies. A population of maggot-flies initially lays eggs in hawthorn fruits, but some individuals start laying eggs in apple fruits, which ripen earlier. This temporal separation in breeding time can lead to reproductive isolation and speciation. C. Parapatric speciation. Parapatric speciation occurs when populations are geographically adjacent but not entirely separated. Gene flow still occurs between the populations, but because of an environmental gradient, there are different selective pressures acting at the edges, leading to the development of distinct traits. This may result in limited interbreeding, particularly where the environmental differences are strongest. Example. The cineraria plants, found in environments with different soil types, show parapatric speciation due to environmental differences leading to adaptations suited to distinct niches. D. Parapatric speciation. Parapatric speciation is a form of allopatric. C. Parapatric speciation. Parapatric speciation occurs when populations are geographically adjacent but not entirely separated. Gene flow still occurs between the populations, but because of an environmental gradient, there are different selective pressures acting at the edges, leading to the development of distinct traits. This may result in limited interbreeding, particularly where the environmental differences are strongest. Example. The cineraria plants, found in environments with different soil types, show parapatric speciation due to environmental differences leading to adaptations suited to distinct niches. D. Parapatric speciation. Parapatric speciation is a form of allopatric speciation that occurs when a small group of individuals becomes isolated at the edge of a larger population. Genetic drift has a more pronounced effect in smaller populations, which can result in significant genetic divergence. Example. A small population of animals on a newly formed island or a remote part of a larger territory may diverge due to genetic drift, resulting in a new species distinct from the parent population. 3. Mechanisms of reproductive isolation. Reproductive isolation is crucial for speciation because it prevents gene flow between populations, ensuring that they evolve separately. Reproductive isolation mechanisms can be either prezygotic or postzygotic. A. Prezygotic isolation. Prezygotic isolation occurs before fertilization. It prevents mating or successful fertilization between different populations or species. The mechanisms include behavioral isolation. Species may have different mating behaviors, songs, or courtship rituals that prevent them from recognizing each other as suitable mates. Temporal isolation. Mating seasons do not overlap, which prevents gene flow between populations that may otherwise come into contact. Ecological isolation. Populations inhabit different ecological niches, preventing them from encountering one another. Mechanical isolation. Structural differences in reproductive organs prevent successful mating. Gametic isolation. Even if mating occurs, gametes may not fuse due to incompatibility. B. Postzygotic isolation. Postzygotic isolation occurs after fertilization and often results in hybrid offspring that are either inviable or sterile. Hybrid inviability. Offspring of matings between different species may not develop properly or die early in development. Hybrid sterility. Hybrids may survive to adulthood but be sterile, preventing gene flow between the species. A classic example is the mule, which is a sterile hybrid between a horse and a donkey. 4. The role of natural selection in genetic drift in speciation. A. Natural selection. D. Parapatric speciation. D. Parapatric speciation. Parapatric speciation is a form of allopatric speciation that occurs when a small group of individuals becomes isolated at the edge of a larger population. Genetic drift has a more pronounced effect in smaller populations, which can result in significant genetic divergence. Example. A small population of animals on a newly formed island or a remote part of a larger territory may diverge due to genetic drift, resulting in a new species distinct from the parent population. 3. Mechanisms of reproductive isolation. Reproductive isolation is crucial for speciation because it prevents gene flow between populations, ensuring that they evolve separately. Reproductive isolation mechanisms can be either prezygotic or postzygotic. A. Prezygotic isolation. Prezygotic isolation occurs before fertilization. It prevents mating or successful fertilization between different populations or species. The mechanisms include behavioral isolation. Species may have different mating behaviors, songs, or courtship rituals that prevent them from recognizing each other as suitable mates. Temporal isolation. Mating seasons do not overlap, which prevents gene flow between populations that may otherwise come into contact. Ecological isolation. Populations inhabit different ecological niches, preventing them from encountering one another. Mechanical isolation. Structural differences in reproductive organs prevent successful mating. Gametic isolation. Even if mating occurs, gametes may not fuse due to incompatibility. B. Postzygotic. B. Postzygotic isolation. Postzygotic isolation occurs after fertilization and often results in hybrid offspring that are either inviable or sterile. Hybrid inviability. Offspring of matings between different species may not develop properly or die early in development. Hybrid sterility. Hybrids may survive to adulthood but be sterile, preventing gene flow between the species. A classic example is the mule, which is a sterile hybrid between a horse and a donkey. 4. The role of natural selection in genetic drift in speciation. 8. Natural selection. Natural selection drives the divergence of populations as they adapt to different environments. As environments change, the individuals with advantageous traits are more likely to survive and reproduce, spreading these traits through the population. Over time, these selective pressures can lead to the formation of new species, especially when coupled with other isolating mechanisms. Example. In cactus finches, natural selection acted on beak shape depending on the availability of different food sources, leading to different forms adapted to distinct ecological niches. B. Genetic drift. In smaller populations, random genetic changes due to genetic drift play a significant role in speciation. Drift can cause the loss of genetic variation and lead to the fixation of alleles in one population, causing genetic differences between isolated populations. This effect is more pronounced in smaller populations. Example. The founder effect can cause genetic drift in isolated populations, leading to reduced genetic diversity and increasing the likelihood of speciation. 5. Previous year's GATE questions on speciation. Q1 GATE Ecology and Evolution 2017. Which of the following best describes the process of allopatric speciation? A. Speciation occurs when populations of a species in the same geographical area evolve into different species. B. A new species forms in different habitats of the same geographical area due to genetic differences. C. A new species forms when populations of a species are geographically isolated from each other. D. Speciation due to temporal isolation. Answer. C. A new species forms when populations of a species are geographically isolated from each other. Explanation. Allopatric speciation occurs when geographic barriers prevent gene flow between populations, leading to reproductive isolation and the eventual formation of new species. Q2 GATE Ecology and Evolution 2020. Which of the following is a key characteristic of parapatric speciation? A. Complete geographical isolation. B. Gene flow between adjacent populations. C. Divergence due to behavioral isolation. D. Temporal separation of mating periods. Answer. B. Gene flow between adjacent populations. Explanation. Parapatric speciation involves populations that are geographically adjacent, with some gene flow still occurring, but divergence happens due to different environmental pressures along the edge of their range. Q3 GATE Ecology and Evolution 2019. In sympatric speciation, reproductive isolation is typically the result of A. Ecological and temporal isolation within the same geographical area. B. Geographical barriers leading to lack of gene flow. C. Mechanical isolation and habitat shifts. D. The emergence of postzygotic isolation mechanisms. Answer. A. Ecological and temporal isolation within the same geographical area. Explanation. Sympatric speciation occurs when populations in the same area become reproductively isolated due to factors like ecological preferences or mating times. 6. Conclusion. Speciation is the central process driving the diversity of life forms on Earth. It occurs when populations of a single species diverge genetically due to factors such as geographical isolation, ecological pressures, and reproductive barriers. Allopatric, sympatric, parapatric, and parapatric speciation are the main modes through which speciation can occur. The mechanisms of reproductive isolation, including both prezygotic and postzygotic barriers, ensure that gene flow is prevented, allowing for the evolution of new species over time. Ready to move on to the next topic. Smile. You said, next. ChatGPT said, ChatGPT Company Evolution 1. Detailed lecture. Coevolution refers to the reciprocal evolutionary changes that occur between two or more interacting species. These species exert selective pressures on one another, leading to an ongoing cycle of adaptation and counter-adaptation. Coevolution can occur between a variety of ecological partners, including predators and prey, parasites and hosts, plants and herbivores, or mutualistic partners such as pollinators and flowering plants. Coevolution plays a fundamental role in shaping species traits and behaviors, leading to the development of specialized adaptations that improve survival or reproductive success. The study of coevolution helps to understand complex ecological interactions and the dynamic evolutionary processes that shape biodiversity. 2. Types of coevolution. A. Mutualistic company evolution. Mutualistic coevolution occurs when two species interact in a way that benefits both. Over time, this mutual relationship can lead to specialized adaptations that enhance the success of the interaction. These interactions often involve the exchange of resources, such as food or shelter, or services like pollination or seed dispersal. Example. Plants and pollinators, flowers and their pollinators e.g., bees, birds, or bats often evolve together. For instance, certain plants may develop specific flower structures, scents, or nectar rewards that attract their particular pollinators, while the pollinators may evolve specific morphological traits, like proboscises, to access the nectar. Example. Mycorrhizal fungi in plants. Mycorrhizal fungi form mutualistic relationships with plant roots, providing the plant with nutrients such as phosphorus in exchange for carbohydrates from the plant. Over evolutionary time, the plant roots and the fungi have specialized structures and mechanisms to benefit from this relationship. B. Antagonistic coevolution. Antagonistic coevolution involves interactions where one species benefits at the expense of the other. This is commonly seen in predator-prey, parasite-host, and herbivore-plant interactions. In these interactions, one species develops strategies to increase its success in the interaction, while the other evolves countermeasures to protect itself. Example. Predator-prey, the evolutionary, arms race, between cheetahs and gazelles exemplifies antagonistic coevolution. Cheetahs evolve increased speed for catching prey, while gazelles evolve better agility and running capabilities to evade predators. Example. Parasite-host, in parasitic relationships, parasites evolve strategies to maximize their reproductive success at the expense of their host, and hosts evolve defenses against the parasites. For instance, the immune system of hosts like vertebrates evolves to detect and fight parasitic infections, while the parasite evolves ways to overcome these defenses. Example. Plants and herbivores. Plants may evolve chemical defenses, toxins, spines, or tough leaves to deter herbivores from eating them, while herbivores evolve mechanisms to tolerate or avoid these defenses. C. Horizontal coevolution. Horizontal coevolution occurs when species that are not direct competitors or mutualists influence each other's evolution. This form of coevolution is often seen in networks of species that share similar ecological roles or functions. Example. Plants and beneficial microorganisms. Beneficial bacteria or fungi that live in the soil around plants can have indirect coevolutionary relationships with the plant species they associate with. These microorganisms often contribute to nutrient availability, which influences the plant's evolutionary development. 3. Mechanisms driving coevolution. Several mechanisms drive the coevolutionary process, resulting in the reciprocal adaptation of species. A. Natural selection. In coevolution, natural selection is a key driving force. For example, as a predator evolves new hunting strategies, such as better vision or stealth, the prey species may experience selective pressure to develop enhanced defense mechanisms, e.g., improved camouflage or speed. B. Genetic drift. Genetic drift can also play a role in coevolution. In small populations, random changes in gene frequencies can cause small adaptations to arise in species that will influence the ongoing interaction with other species. C. Frequency-dependent selection. Coevolutionary interactions can lead to frequency-dependent selection, where the fitness of a phenotype depends on how common or rare it is in a population. For example, in some predator-prey dynamics, predators may become more efficient at catching the most common form of prey, leading to an increased frequency of rare prey phenotypes as they are harder to catch. D. Gene flow and migration. Gene flow between different populations of species can facilitate coevolutionary relationships. For example, if individuals from different populations of a species with specific adaptations to a particular environmental condition interbreed, their offspring may exhibit new evolutionary traits that affect other interacting species. 4. Coevolution and ecological interactions. Coevolution often occurs in dynamic ecosystems where species are tightly interconnected. These interactions can drive specialization and adaptation over time. The study of coevolution enhances our understanding of ecological processes, species interactions, and biodiversity maintenance. A. Coevolution in ecosystems. Coevolutionary relationships are common in diverse ecosystems such as tropical rainforests, coral reefs, and grasslands, where species interact with each other in complex ways. In these systems, interactions such as mutualism, parasitism, predation, and herbivore drive the evolution of specialized traits. B. Coevolution and biodiversity. Through coevolution, species become adapted to their specific ecological roles, which can lead to increased biodiversity. For example, mutualistic relationships such as pollination or seed dispersal can drive the diversification of plants, while herbivores and predators drive the evolution of various species defenses. 5. Previous year's GATE questions on coevolution. Q1 GATE Ecology and Evolution 2015, which of the following best describes an example of coevolution? A. The evolution of camouflage in animals for protection from predators. B. The evolution of longer necks in giraffes to feed on tall trees. C. The reciprocal adaptation between flowering plants and their pollinators. D. The evolution of antibiotic resistance in bacteria. Answer. C. The reciprocal adaptation between flowering plants and their pollinators. Explanation. Coevolution involves reciprocal adaptations between interacting species. The evolution of specialized flowers and their pollinators is a classic example of this. Q2 GATE Ecology and Evolution 2017. What is an example of mutualistic coevolution? A. Cheetahs evolving better speed and gazelles evolving better agility. B. Ticks evolving to enhance blood feeding capacity and the host species evolving defense mechanisms. C. Plants evolving traits to attract specific pollinators, and pollinators evolving traits to better access nectar. D. Wolves evolving faster hunting methods and rabbits evolving better camouflage. Answer. C. Plants evolving traits to attract specific pollinators, and pollinators evolving traits to better access nectar. Explanation. This describes a mutualistic coevolutionary relationship, where both species benefit from the interaction. Q3 GATE Ecology and Evolution 2019. Which of the following is a likely outcome of antagonistic coevolution between a predator and prey? A. Increased mutual benefits for both species. B. Genetic convergence between the species. C. Increased speed of the predator and enhanced evasion abilities of the prey. D. Reduced genetic diversity in both populations. Answer. C. Increased speed of the predator and enhanced evasion abilities of the prey. Explanation. In antagonistic coevolution, one species, the predator, evolves to become more efficient in catching prey, while the prey evolves adaptations to avoid being captured. 6. Conclusion. Coevolution is a powerful evolutionary force that drives the adaptation of species through reciprocal interactions. Whether through mutualistic, antagonistic, or horizontal coevolution, species continuously evolve in response to one another's traits, leading to the development of highly specialized behaviors and strategies. Understanding coevolution helps explain the intricacies of ecological relationships and the evolutionary processes that shape life on Earth. Would you like to move on to the next topic? Smile. You said, next. ChatGPT said, ChatGPT. Population Genetics 1. Detailed lecture. Population genetics is the branch of genetics that studies the genetic composition of populations and how it changes over time. It combines principles of genetics and evolutionary biology to understand the mechanisms of evolution, the structure of populations, genetic diversity, and the effects of evolutionary forces such as natural selection, genetic drift, mutation, and gene flow on populations. A population is a group of organisms of the same species that live in a specific geographical area and interbreed. The study of population genetics examines allele frequencies, genetic variation, and how they are influenced by evolutionary processes. These concepts are critical to understanding how species evolve, how genetic diversity is maintained, and how adaptation occurs. 2. Allele frequency and Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. A. Allele frequency. Allele frequency refers to how common a particular allele variant of a gene is in a population. This frequency is measured as a proportion of the total alleles for a particular gene in the population. Formula. If there are two alleles for a gene, A and A, the allele frequency of A is represented as P. P, and the allele frequency of A as Q. Q. According to the Hardy-Weinberg principle, P plus Q equals 1. P plus Q equals 1. This means the total frequency of alleles in the population always equals 1. Example. In a population of 100 individuals, if 80 individuals have the genotype A, 15 have A, and 5 have A, we can calculate the allele frequencies of A and A by counting how many A and alleles are present in the total population. B. Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. The Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium principle states that the genetic makeup of a population remains constant from generation to generation in the absence of evolutionary forces. This equilibrium is based on a set of assumptions. No mutation. No gene flow, migration, random mating. Large population size, no genetic drift, no natural selection. If these assumptions are met, allele frequencies in a population will remain constant over time. The principle can be used as a null model to compare against real populations that undergo evolutionary change. Formula for genotype frequencies. In a population with two alleles, A and A, the frequencies of the three possible genotypes A, can be represented by P. 2P2. For A2. PQ. 2PQ for AQ. 2Q2. For A where P. P is the allele frequency of A, and Q. Q is the allele frequency of A. Example, if P equals 0.7. P equals 0.7 and Q equals 0.3. Q equals 0.3, the frequencies of the genotypes are P. 2 equals 0.7, 2 equals 0.49 A P. 2 equals 0.72 equals 0.49 A 2. PQ equals 2 times 0.7 times 0.3 equals 0.42 A. 2PQ equals 2 times 0.7 times 0.3 equals 0.42 A Q. 2 equals 0.3, 2 equals 0.09 A Q. 2 equals 0.32 equals 0.09 A. If the population's actual genotype frequencies deviate from these expectations, it suggests that the population is undergoing some form of evolutionary change. 3. Evolutionary forces. Evolutionary forces act on a population's genetic structure, causing changes in allele frequencies over generations. These forces include A. Natural selection. Natural selection is a process by which certain traits increase in frequency because they provide a survival or reproductive advantage. Individuals with advantageous alleles are more likely to survive and reproduce, passing these alleles to the next generation. Example. In a population of peppered moths, dark-colored moths had a selective advantage during the Industrial Revolution in England because they were less visible to predators on darkened tree bark. B. Genetic drift. Genetic drift is the random fluctuation in allele frequencies due to chance events. It is more pronounced in small populations. Unlike natural selection, genetic drift does not necessarily favor beneficial alleles. Alleles may increase or decrease purely by chance. Example. In a small population of plants, a single individual carrying a rare allele may reproduce and pass on that allele to many descendants by random chance. C. Mutation. Mutation is the ultimate source of genetic variation. Mutations are random changes in the DNA sequence, which can lead to new alleles. While most mutations are neutral or harmful, some can be advantageous and subject to natural selection. Example. A mutation in a bacterial gene could confer resistance to an antibiotic, making those bacteria more likely to survive and reproduce when exposed to the antibiotic. D. Gene flow, migration. Gene flow refers to the movement of alleles between populations through migration of individuals. Gene flow increases genetic diversity within a population and can introduce new alleles into a population. Example. If individuals from one population of animals migrate to another population, their alleles may become part of the gene pool of the second population, potentially leading to new traits in the population. 4. Genetic variability and measuring diversity. Measuring genetic variability is an important part of population genetics. It can be assessed at various levels, such as the gene, individual, or population level. A. Heterozygosity. Heterozygosity is a measure of genetic diversity. It is the proportion of individuals in a population that are heterozygous for a particular gene. Higher heterozygosity indicates greater genetic diversity. Formula, H equals 1 minus n array summation pi2. H equals 1 minus n array summation pi. 2. Where pi is the frequency of the ith allele at a locus. B. Polymorphism. Polymorphism refers to the presence of multiple different alleles at a gene locus within a population. High levels of polymorphism are indicative of high genetic diversity. Example. The ABO blood group system in humans is an example of polymorphism with multiple alleles at the same genetic locus, leading to different blood types. 5. Previous year's GATE questions on population genetics. Q1 GATE Ecology and Evolution 2018. In Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium, the allele frequencies in a population are P equals 0.6. P equals 0.6 and Q equals 0.4. Q equals 0.4. What is the frequency of the heterozygous genotype? A. 0.24B, 0.48C, 0.36D, 0.32. Answer, B. 0.48. Explanation. The frequency of the heterozygous genotype is 2. PQ. 2PQ, which equals 2. Times 0.6 times 0.4 equals 0.48. 2 times 0.6 times 0.4 equals 0.48. Q2 GATE Ecology and Evolution 2021. Which of the following evolutionary mechanisms decreases genetic variation in a population? A. Natural selection. B. Gene flow. C. Mutation. D. Genetic drift. Answer, D. Genetic drift. Explanation. Genetic drift decreases genetic variation, especially in small populations, as random fluctuations may cause some alleles to be lost or fixed. Q3 GATE Ecology and Evolution 2019. Which of the following is a prediction of the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium? A. Allele frequencies change over time in the presence of genetic drift. B. Allele frequencies remain constant in the absence of evolutionary forces. C. The frequency of heterozygotes remains constant over generations. D. Natural selection changes the allele frequencies of a population. Answer. B. Allele frequencies remain constant in the absence of evolutionary forces. Explanation. According to Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium, in the absence of evolutionary forces, allele frequencies in a population will remain constant. 6. Conclusion. Population genetics provides crucial insights into the genetic diversity within populations and how evolutionary forces influence allele frequencies over time. By understanding how natural selection, genetic drift, mutation, and gene flow shape genetic variation, we can make predictions about how populations evolve and adapt to changing environments. It forms the foundation for understanding evolutionary biology at a population level, helping explain patterns of diversity, adaptation, and speciation. Would you like to continue to the next topic? Smile. You said, next. ChatGPT said, ChatGPT Speciation 1. Detailed lecture. Speciation is the evolutionary process by which new species arise from a common ancestral species. It occurs when populations of a species become reproductively isolated from one another and evolve different characteristics, leading to the formation of distinct species. Speciation is a fundamental concept in evolutionary biology and explains the diversity of life forms on Earth. It can occur in various ways, influenced by geographic, ecological, or behavioral factors that lead to reproductive isolation between populations. 2. Types of speciation. Speciation is commonly classified into two broad categories, allopatric speciation and sympatric speciation. Allopatric speciation. Allopatric speciation occurs when a population is geographically separated into two or more isolated groups, preventing gene flow between them. Over time, these isolated populations may accumulate genetic differences due to mutation, genetic drift, and natural selection. Eventually, they can become reproductively isolated even if they come into contact again. Mechanisms involved. Geographic isolation. Physical barriers such as rivers, mountains, or vast distances separate populations. Genetic divergence. Over time, different selection pressures and genetic drift cause the populations to diverge genetically. Reproductive isolation. When the populations reunite, they can no longer interbreed due to genetic differences such as differences in mating behavior or chromosomal structure. Example. Darwin's finches on the Galapagos Islands. A population of ancestral finches became geographically isolated on different islands. Over time, they evolved into distinct species with different beak shapes adapted to different food sources. These finches are now reproductively isolated from each other. B. Sympatric speciation. Sympatric speciation occurs without geographic isolation. Instead, new species arise within a single population while still living in the same area. This form of speciation is driven by reproductive isolation mechanisms, such as behavioral differences, ecological niches, or polyploidy in plants. Mechanisms involved. Ecological isolation. Differences in ecological preferences or habitats within the same geographic area, e.g., some individuals may prefer one type of habitat while others prefer another. Behavioral isolation. Differences in mating behaviors that reduce interbreeding within a population, e.g., different mating songs in birds. Polyploidy. In plants, the occurrence of more than two sets of chromosomes can result in new species that cannot interbreed with the parent population, even though they live in the same area. Example. Cichlid fish in Lake Victoria. In Lake Victoria, cichlid fish evolved into different species without being geographically isolated. They